Please welcome Juliette Barr, Director, Enterprise Sales, Sourcemap. Devender Gupta, Co-founder, Asmara International Limited. And Jason Craw, President, Li Fung. With Edward Hertzman, President and Founder, Sourcing Journal.
You know, we've heard from the retailers, but I think it's very important we hear from upstream, what's going on at the factory level. So Devender, I want to start with you. Last 18 months have been extremely volatile. We've all said that already. But what is your outlook when you look at your supply matrix on costs heading into 2023?
So I think cost has always been a challenge, irrespective of what time we are living in, whether it was, post-pandemic, pre-pandemic. We have never seen a time when the customer has said, I've got a fantastic cost. It's always been a challenge. You're always looking to find ways to cut corners in spite of, the wages going up, the cost of living going up. That's a reality. So I think as an industry, I think we are one of the most resilient industries. We always find ways, to make the things work. I think ours is the only industry where the FOB cost is deflationary. It's never going up. When it goes up, it's not compared to, what kind of inflation is happening in the other areas, other markets. So having said that, I think the good thing which we see in the industry is that there is a lot of thinking in terms of how you can use the technology in the best way possible, how you can have better systems, leaner way of working, be more flexible in your mindset. And that is really helping, I believe, in terms of taking care of the cost pressure. It's not going to go away, but we are finding ways to work together with the brands, try to work with them closely to chase more, which can help to have the better ASP for them. And if they have better ASP, they are able to pay better cost. So that's how we see the future also.
Jason, how are you managing, costing expectations with your partners?
Well, the last 2 years have seen unprecedented challenges, but they're all different. Every 6 months it's been another headwind, but they're not the same headwind continuously. And so you deal with one crisis, then you're into the next, then you're into the next. So how do you think about end-to-end service? Because something is not going to be optimized. But if you can think about the average service and how you make it work globally, that's kind of where you kind of make your win. And the other thing about our industry is it's very arbitrage based. You have times when it's a seller's market and you have times when it's a buyer's market. And we've seen these cycles go on and on and on. The last couple of years, though, with demand being hyper demand at the consumer, it's definitely been from a factory standpoint a seller's market, and that's where a lot of the true inflation or maybe artificial on top inflation has come based on supply and demand. So dealing with that's been one of the biggest challenges, and what comes up comes down, but finds its intersection of where it should sit, and that's what we're trying to feel out right now.
Earlier, I think it was Darren who mentioned, with energy issues and food issues, is it realistic to say that FOB prices, even if there's some open capacity, because demand is going down, is still never going to settle back to where it once was?
You really can't say that, because 6 months ago we might have been sitting here talking about logistics and freight costs, and we said, is a $3,000 container ever going to happen in our future? And most people will probably say, no, it's going to level off somewhere in the middle. And now you're starting to see spot rates right around there. So you can't say never, and we're in a deflationary industry like you mentioned. But for right now, it's not 2019, and it's not going to be 2019. So certain things come back into equilibrium as consumption drops. Sometimes things get, we had not one thing out of balance, we had 50 things out of balance driving up cost. So pull back by units, quantities, sometimes resets, and then you see where it goes, and then it becomes normal market conditions again.
So one thing that I don't think we spent enough time on today is geopolitical instability. It could be China, it could be Ukraine, it could be currency issues that we're seeing, it could be energy issues, it could be a junta in Myanmar, massive inflation in Sri Lanka. I don't know, it's like 800% to get a bag of rice or something. It's crazy. I'm very concerned about Taiwan and what that represents. How do you manage these risks while still pursuing diversification, and what recommendations do you have for your clients?
So we look at 2017 as the first inflection point. Trade war starts, it's kind of a signal. The world's not the way you're used to seeing it. We've had 20, 30 years of incredible stability. Everything worked. We didn't have global jolts and crises. We had minor regional things. And so that was really saying, this whole, we're going to go to a multilateral world in terms of thinking about individual relationships with countries, and we're going to have disruption. And so at that point, the world started disrupting, and a lot of us did. Probably not as far as we would have liked to, but we all started this diversification of supply chain. And that shift was really critical. But if you think about COVID as a test, did we do the right job? You have to look today about country diversification, within a country diversification, regional diversification, and you have to think about the world in 4 or 5 quadrants. If you think about it really, at least in apparel sourcing for the United States, we think about China as a region, ASEAN as a region, the subcontinent's a region, Africa is a growing region, and then you have this nearshore region. And how do you balance the 5 to have them where one region doesn't destroy you if something does happen in a trade war? And that balance is what we're trying to figure out and get to. But I think most people in this room would say, looking back on it, we were probably not diversified enough when COVID happened. We thought we were, we weren't.
But even those that said they were diversified, all of a sudden they couldn't get their fabric or their raw materials because still the majority is coming out of China. So if we even talk about Taiwan, what percentages of technical fabrics are coming out of there? How much risk do we have still in that region?
Well, China's the world's provider of components. It still is the way. Most companies we work with definitely have a strategy to near shore to countries of production raw material procurement. And we've seen KPIs anywhere from 30 to 50% within the next couple of years of getting there. But we're not there. And that definitely is part of the protection that you have to build into it. But this is not ending. What we saw, jolts now are going to be global in nature. They won't be so regionalized. And so we have to be redundant and have a supply chain that can back up every category in another region. It can't just be, I do one category only here. That's a recipe for disaster because today's China could be next year's other country. And so where's that disruption coming from? That is unknown, and yet that's why the balancing act is so critical. It's an insurance policy. You don't not take fire insurance on a house. Diversification is part of that. It's an insurance policy.
You have anything to add to that, Devender?
No, I think what Jason says is right. And having said that, I think one very big trend which has emerged after the logistical nightmare, which everybody went through, is that onshoring, or I would say more like creating better raw material base, has been one of the key things where every country is investing now. And even the Chinese suppliers, they are investing, or they're going out of the China. A lot of people are investing into countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, India. We see big raw material base getting created. The trend is towards going or putting more production into the countries where the raw material can be easily available, or is under development, or you can be sure that the vendor itself has a very strong relationship, in terms of controlling the whole raw material base.
So Juliette, compliance, chain of custody, these parts of business that were tangential in the past have become paramount to just fairly operating in today's environment. Have you seen an influx of companies try to get and keep up to speed?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think in the last 2 years, we've seen a massive shift, especially driven by US-led legislation. The most recent one is the UFLPA, but you have also just the forced labor ban in general. There's about 116 products from 77 countries that are banned, or at least a suspicion of forced labor. And really in the last 2 years for us, we've seen a massive adoption of supply chain, getting to want to know your supply chain upstream, chain of custody, traceability. It went from nice to have that a few very leading company in the sustainability space were interested in to validate their sustainability claim to mandatory to do business in the US. There is the upcoming regulations in the EU around deforestation, forced labor, anti-greenwashing. You can't say you're organic if you can't prove it anymore. And all of that is back to using traceability and chain of custody to prove all of this. And yes, for us, we've seen in terms of company, you mentioned tech company that don't make profits. Well, for us, the good news is that it's not our problem for the last 2 years, because we really saw traceability went from a nice to have to mandatory to do business, and have this visibility from CPOs now. It's at the C-suite. It's not just living under a sustainability umbrella in a corner at the company.
So Devender, I asked Barbara obviously about the buyer-supplier relationship. I'm very critical, obviously, of the cancellations and some of the unnecessary pressure we put on our factory partners. But I'd like to hear from you and Jason. What's your perspective? Has things really changed at all? Do you feel that the retailers and wholesalers are treating their factory partners any different, or are we just back to business as usual?
I think there's a huge difference. I think all the companies which did well, and in fact we all know that this industry is all about inequality in the way companies perform. Irrespective of the time we are living in, there are not more than 20 to 30% companies which are really doing well. And most of the other companies are either like doing average or they're struggling. What we see post-pandemic is that the partnerships have become more stronger, and people have forged let's say stronger alliances, and they have also learned to rely on each other and trust on each other much more. I mean, there was almost no travel happening for 2 years. But in that 2 years, if we see the way the industry has performed is phenomenal. Without any customer coming in for approvals, design presentations on face-to-face basis, the business really grew. Like 2019 levels were supposed to be back by the end of 2022, but actually we achieved that by the end of 2021. And in fact, in the mid-luxury level, I would say the business in 22 is going to be plus 5 to 10%, compared to 2019 level. So I must say that, the industry has really learned to come together, and the relationships have become much more stronger. And obviously, on a micro level, there are people who are doing extremely well, and at the same time, there are people who are not doing so well. And I definitely see 23 to be another year where there would be a lot of course correction. Not many more people will, go out of the business, and which in a way is not bad for the industry, because we do have oversupply overall.
Jason, I want to challenge what he's saying a little bit, because I'm not going to call anyone out. I don't need the phone to ring in to have subscription cancellations tomorrow. But I know for a fact there are very large companies that have canceled a lot of orders this year. Billions of dollars of orders were canceled. Some of the best companies in the world. It's very reminiscent. Okay, maybe everyone got a free pass in 2020. We all thought the world was ending. Things really changing? Do you think things are really changing?
Well, 2020 was something no one's ever seen before. But even within all those cancellations, because we saw people raise the force majeure clause, we saw just flat out walk away and say, I'm not responsible. There was a whole group of people who didn't take that approach. And there's a bunch of people in this room like that, who stood by their suppliers, even in difficult times, and did not cancel everything and did not walk away. And they said, how do we create a solution? We'll delay, we'll hold, we'll figure it out. And there was this partnership. Post 2020, that was a bit of a pill for certain suppliers to swallow. They remember it. So when things bounce back and everyone's now is hyper consumption, those vendors then turned around and said, I'm going to support those people who support me. That's where I'm going to give my capacity. That's where I'm going to double down. And the people who are transactional, then I don't need those people in the future. And we've seen a lot of that happen where custom vendors have made clear choices based on this. And now we look at today's world and the over inventory situation, and everyone starts pulling back. We've seen the retail and brand side, not sort of go at it the same way. It's not as dire, but yes, there's cancellations, but there's a lot more partnership in the industry saying, how do we figure this out together? It may take us a year, it may take us 8 months, but how do we do this versus taking the hard stance? That's a shift. And I think that's because you need stable supply chains. But good suppliers don't grow on trees. And there's a limited amount of them, and capacity is needed in those premium places.
So if you take some cancellations into account, you also take some right sizing of the inventory that's happening. Brands are also packing and holding. Some things came in late. Some people are not able to sell through things. Where is this leaving the factories right now? I mean, earlier I said some people are telling me there's 30, 40% open capacity, but the factories had to add people. They added additional lines. What shape are they in right now? Can they weather another 12 or 18 months of difficult days ahead?
Working capital is the biggest drain today. Sitting with goods for 8 months, 9 months in warehouses and factories is a drain. You already paid for the components. It's sitting for a long time. That's a 12-month cycle, end to end. So that drain definitely hurts people. Capacity has to be filled. So that's where the arbitrage comes in, because in the seller's market, they kind of overcharge on some of these things. Now they're going to undercharge. So that's going to be you're going to see some inflation, relief from the arbitrage side of things and costing, because factories do need to get filled. But there will be some factories that do pull back on some capacity, and you'll leave some lines idle and not sell it, just because it's uncertain about volatility, demand, how it's going to play out next year. Is it a bullwhip effect? We all pulled back so far, but is that just the initial reaction because we don't know how to gauge this inflation environment? I mean, most of us have not been around for since the last time this cycle happened in the 80s. So is there a roadmap? Not really. So we got to feel it out. And so because of that, we feel people also are a little on the bullwhip side of conservative, and somewhere it will level off in the middle, but we just don't know what that level is yet.
Well, that's what you were saying, right?
Yeah. So I want to add here that we first need to put into perspective why the inventory is high. I think two very important reasons. Everybody ordered way much in advance, because almost like 1.5 to 2 months extra in terms of shipping, and then also moving the goods within US, with all the backlogs and everything which was happening at the port. So obviously we did see a lot of wrong things getting ordered because of that, because there was also let's say wardrobe reset, as far as the customers are concerned. The moment work from home started to go away, people started to travel, there was totally different look they were looking for. So suddenly, everybody realizes that they have more of something which people don't want, and they have less of something which everybody wants. And we see a lot of chase happening because of that. So overall, we don't see the demand really going down. We definitely see the course correction in terms of the lead times which were given, and how the people were looking at, what they're buying. So I think the capacities will need to be managed in terms of where suddenly there was a demand for 100,000 of a single order, will be now maybe like 10 to 15,000 pieces, and then they're getting repeats and repeats of that. So that's where I think everybody really needs to work together. We believe it's very important to listen, work proactively with the customer, see what is going on, find solutions, in a way where they can still get more goods which they have higher ASP, because I believe that's most important. Currently, what we see in the industry is that there are so many goods which actually consumer don't need, and we see again so many discounting strategies being adopted, which is not good. So hopefully the retailers have already realized that they have to control the inventory. So when they are canceling or they're telling people to keep the goods for some time, I think it's a good sign. If you look at it in the sense like they want to have a discipline about what kind of an inventory they are having. And which is why we believe that, in the fashion categories, and almost like I would say 70% is fashion now, only 30% is core, the chase will start to play a very, very important role. And chase is better than fast fashion in any case,
So this number of 30% open capacity, this is just a right sizing. It's not indicative of what the entire year is going to look like. You think we're going to see a lot of chase and a lot of right sizing as we move through the year?
That's right. And actually 30% is a number, right? I mean, if you look at countries like India, for example, they always have a lean period in the fall. So obviously they're not making their capacity, based on fall. Their capacity is based on spring and summer. and they will have to go through the lean period. And I think that's what we are actually experiencing right now.
So Juliette, what are the biggest pain points that you're hearing from your customers? Phone rings, what are they saying they need?
That they don't know that supply chain. They have very limited, like until 2 years ago, and again, it's still a new exercise for a lot of companies to get to know who is in their upstream supply chain. They know very well the tier one, and especially I think, as it's been mentioned during the pandemic, it really kind of brought them together and partnering with the tier one. However, everything below, beyond that, upstream, tier two, the ginner, the spinner, the farms, or in food, the traders, and the farm and the co-ops, still a lot of black box, and so that's what we're here to help them get. The one thing I want to emphasize is, and I think that's been brought up in this panel and other panel, if you're not willing to get to know your supplier, like really knowing them, not just do I have risk in China, do I have risk in India, but get to know who they are, what they do, you won't be able to go very far and to address the compliance issue of asking them for chain of custody document to import your goods in the US, to address potential issues of forced labor and working with them through it, or making your own decision, but also operational risk resilience. If you're not willing to get to know them and what's their issue and work with them, the response rate, which is the big thing around for supply chain traceability and transparency, how do I make my suppliers answer? Well, they need to understand that genuinely you want to know them and you want to work with them. And if you don't have that, you're not going to go very far.
I don't remember what grade you start to use a calculator, but I remember my teacher saying garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And so the question I always have for companies that are based really around data, especially user-generated data, you're relying on the customer or the vendor to input this. How do we protect ourselves against bad data? Because how do I know that vendor A is taking a transaction certificate and loading it 5 times and saying that, oh, this organic cotton is, how does your system self-regulate or protect itself against this?
For sure, but there's 2 types of issues with data. It's just basic errors manually. You've entered wrong phone number once or a wrong data. So on the technical side, on the day-to-day, we are making the platform as user-friendly with lots of data validation at the entry. So the user right away see if he or she made a mistake. However, when you start talking about kind of globally being able alerted to that, there is the validation between suppliers. So if your supplier A is saying, hey, I work with supplier B, we'll always check with supplier B, is it true? Or are you just a random supplier they provided? And then there is the need to have enough data. If you just do a pilot with 2 or 3 suppliers, it's going to be very hard to verify that data. However, when you have enough transaction data, enough volume, we can start to see incoherency in the data. The volume don't add up. There's no way 100 people factory in Bangladesh made that many T-shirts. Or there's no way that a shipment that arrived in March was actually, the raw material, when we look at the chain of custody, was actually delivered in April. How is that possible that you get your shirt in March if in April only the cotton was delivered? So all of that are kind of algorithms that we put in place to verify that data. However, it does require to do it at scale. In our experience. The pilot is good to understand the maturity of your suppliers and are they willing to participate and learn from them. From the data verification standpoint, you need to have enough data.
But your system will flag.
Exactly.
If you see the same
incoherency, yes. And then it can be many things. It can be errors, it can be waste, it can be fraud. So the system alerts you to start to dig into this.
That's interesting. So Asmara and Li Fung, obviously you're global companies, and obviously you have a bunch of clients that are in the EU. Are you seeing the Europeans dealing with legislation around sustainability? Are they dealing with the legislation around sustainability and compliance differently than the people in the States are handling it? Do they approach the business differently? Is there anything we can learn from the Europeans?
From our view, historic European always had more regulations about shipping, especially countries like Germany, in terms of testing and compliance historically. As we've seen all this regulation come through, it's become sort of a global marketplace. Whatever happens in the United States, you generally see something mirroring it in the EU or in Britain, and vice versa. And so if one does today, the other one's going to do 6 months behind, and we're seeing that alignment. So If you just take whatever you see as the new model in either continent and you apply it to both, you'll be in a general good position. But complying is always very difficult because there's so much that's being put through these days. And how do you stay compliant? How do you follow through everything if you're in multiple countries? And the remote control of the world is not possible in today's environment. You can't sit in Taiwan and just place in 7 countries and I have all the data come in and I'll look at it. Today's world requires boots on the ground locally and to really validate, check, be in control. You can't move people around with COVID to the same level as before. That's probably going to be a way into the future, most likely. So how do you get really local to be able to validate, control, comply, and not be at the risk of, remote control and just garbage in, garbage out?
Devender?
So see, in our experience, Europe has always been very different in terms of handling situations than US. US is always about structure. They'll always make a very strong organization. The first thing any regulation will take place, the companies will invest into teams, organizations to follow up, to educate and get agencies on board for training, for checking and so on. Europe, on the other hand, is like do it yourself kind of an approach. They will leave it to the vendor, they will leave it to people like us. They will say, okay, you have to do it, This is what we need and you make sure that it is going to happen. Which in fact I believe is something what Jason is also saying, that you need to leave it to the people who are on the ground to make the things happen. And I believe that today most of us in this room, it's become part of our DNA. We are very, very quick in terms of taking care of any new regulation which is coming in. The people are very, very proactive about it. We talk about sustainability, but if you really ask me, as far as the manufacturing, countries are concerned, we've been working on ESG for a very long time. Where sustainability was just one part of it, whether it be chemical compliances, whether it be the governance, what is going on. So I think I would really say that the manufacturing community is much ahead in terms of adopting, in terms of responding to the regulations which are coming in. And that includes all the chemical companies, they include all the manufacturing people. So I think we are in a good space in terms of overall taking care of whatever regulations which are coming in, whether they get started in EU, followed by US, or started by US, followed by EU.
So you think the upstream is more prepared and ready than necessarily some of the retailers and brands are?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Very interesting. All right, let's take a few questions. If you don't ask a question, I'll start calling on people, so, all right? Hold on.
As we all know, the UFLPA is based around cotton and the Xinjiang province. How would we tackle 2 issues that I think are commonly known? One is China government is buying 80% of cotton from that province, and the second is it's impossible to put boots on the ground there. So how do we manage to really support that UFLPA?
I'll jump in on that one. Well, we look at the cotton index and people may say cotton prices have come down. China cotton prices have come down. Outside of China has not. They've actually gone up a little bit. And so what we've seen is there's a combination of work. Can you trace back all the way to the fields? Very hard to do, and it's something that is being built in supply chain today. It's tier 5 all the way back. In the short term, we've seen a lot of our clients and customers specify, we want imported cotton, buy it from outside, process it, and that's a way of controlling it. So if you're buying your own cotton, that works. If you're buying speed to market and you're taking a stock fabric that's on the shelf, there's no way to know what's going on. So in which case, you almost have to say, we're not going to do the speed when the fabric's on the shelf and we can't validate it. You have to basically buy and procure order to be able to start tracing. It's a challenge.
Juliette?
Yeah, the only thing I add to that for us on the software side, we're always trying to just, again, understand your supply chain. And yes, the UFLPA, cotton, tomatoes, polysilicon, all of those things that come from Tsingshan. It's, again, partnering with your suppliers, like was just mentioned, in terms of sourcing. For us, it's trying to understand it. And right now it's Tsingshan, but maybe tomorrow it's going a part of Bangladesh or another part of Indonesia. So really trying to understand where everything comes from, because right now it's the UFLPA specifically, but potentially next year it's going to be something else. So it has been really the approach with the chain of custody, building the capability within supplier to give you even that information so you can answer CBP when you import goods is definitely the approach, but also start to engage your other suppliers. First of all, because it's illegal to just target China. If you're asking Chinese supplier, it cannot be just Chinese supplier. You need to ask the same question to your supplier in India or Bangladesh or wherever, or Mexico, wherever they are in the world. And so start doing this work so that you're prepared for the next legislations that might be coming in, which is not the UFLPA.
Yeah, I also want to just echo the same sentiment. I think it's all about the supplier. And we clearly see that there is a lot of ownership most of the people are taking. And you just have to keep on educating and working with them on a proactive manner, because there are leakages, there are things which have already happened. It's not like that cotton has not been distributed. The cotton could be there for maybe 2 years old also. So it's all about how you're working with the supplying the manufacturing community on a day-to-day basis, and what kind of a transparency you can bring into the system. That's what I would like to just add on.
I'd also say that cotton could originate in China but end up in many parts of the world. So it's not just a China-specific issue, but I think it's a paradox now, because all we've been talking about today is lean, responsive, agile, responsive, chase. And now we're saying we have to go all the way and start at the beginning. And I think it's just this added complexity to our business. There's no simple fix here.
It's an end-to-end world today.
One more question? Oh, there's a toss-up here. All right, we'll do both. Mark, you first.
Thanks, Eddie. So Jason, you kind of gave an either-or, where it's either speed or verification. But do you see any companies positioning materials? So waiting to the last minute to dye gray to color, waiting to the last minute to determine body or size break, or even distribution. Where do I want the product to go?
Very much so. We see milestones of triggers all the way through. I have grays locked up. I'm not picking the color to X date. I'm not. It's no different than the traditional Zara model, and we see it being utilized more today because we have to, because we want to control our components, but we also want to have some degree of flexibility. So we do see that happening at every price level at retail today. It's not just the specialty world anymore. It's at every level.
Thank you. I was intrigued by the comment Devender made near the end about how manufacturers are readier than buyers with respect to dealing with some of these legislative changes that are coming down the pipe. Given that this industry historically has seen information sharing and best practice sharing being driven down from buyers to manufacturers, how do you see us overcoming that, flipping that switch so that we can have some of those learnings go back up from manufacturers to buyers?
Actually, the shift is already there. If you look at the organizations, at least I can talk from the sourcing perspective. I'm 100% sure that every organization, every retailer, every brand probably has 50% less people now than they ever had in their sourcing metrics. So most of the best practices, which are coming in, is actually coming from the Asia, from the manufacturing point of view. And they are readily being shared on a day-to-day basis, in terms of, how we do the 3D design, using, how we, share, let's say, what could be a better way of manufacturing to bring down the cost. What way we can have the order flow coming in so that the lines can be utilized or can be more efficient. So it's already happening, on a day-to-day basis. The customer is relying more and more on what we tell them and how we are guiding them in terms of, what is the best way for them to work with Asia or with the manufacturing company, as well as, what their demand is from the consumer.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.